here's a question. When's the right moment to begin stress management or to begin practicing?
Right now.
I heard that. I pointed because I was amazed. All of a sudden, you got the right answer right away. There's something about this moment that we take with us that may be a good starting place. This may be a little unorthodox beginning for some of you folks, but if you can hang with us. So there's also silence that's available to us. That's on the outside. Hopefully you get moments of silence here and there. But that might not be what's going on inside. As we all know, it just takes a moment or two to observe what's happening internally, and there can be chatter, there can be movement of the mind. But I thought, for the moment, this is a good place to begin. Silence, this moment, and also noticing that we have this moment. And I think this is an incredibly powerful place and a simple place to start when we're thinking about managing stress, is that we have the ability to notice, to turn our attention from out there or being caught up in the doing of things to just saying, what's happening? And pretty simply, we call that observation. Now, there's another piece to that. There's observing what's happening out there, people, places, traffic, work, weather. And then there's the observation of what's going on in here. So you may start to think about where we're going to head with this. But before we go further, let me introduce myself. My name is Dan Guerra. I'm a clinical psychologist and executive coach. I have a practice here in Midtown Manhattan. And also the co-author, obviously, of a book From Stress to Centered. And I thought I'd tell you something else about myself. One of my passions is to use improvisation and play in lots of areas of my life to help people become more personally effective. Also tell you a vulnerable part to me, because when you give these talks, there's immediate projection of, oh, stress management guy, maybe there's a little Zen thing going on, or he's got, half of you are going, yeah, right. But I deal with stress every day, just like the rest of you. So we're in this boat together. And I happen to be, as my colleague will probably tell you, a little type A, a little perfectionistic. And so I need this, and that's what this is born out of, not this sort of thing that we study from afar and then we impart our wisdom to you. So this is the setup for today's workshop, in that we're in this together and we want to share some of what we've encountered in our experience, our personal experience too. So I'd also like to hand it over to my colleague to introduce herself.
Yes, well, it's very nice to meet everybody. We're glad you could make it. My name's Dr. Dana Gianta, and I'm also a psychologist and an executive coach. And I'm also a native New Yorker, so no matter where I go, I always consider myself a New Yorker at heart. And I practice right now in Connecticut. And welcome, come on in. And I work with individuals and organizations around these topics, so stress management, self-care, and also boundaries, setting personal and professional boundaries. So we're happy you're able to make it, and we look forward to the workshop.
So in keeping with this idea of observation, this practice, let's take a minute and just pause on that and reflect. And I'd like to hear from one or two of you, and don't worry, this isn't a group therapy session, but just something about, what are you noticing? What's happening inside? If I asked you to ask you to notice, feeling, thought, something that happened on the way, just a brief sound bite. Anyone care to share? No right or wrong answers. Yeah. What's your name?
Rhonda.
Rhonda. Thank you.
My monkey chatter that's always in my head is starting to calm down.
That's what you're noticing. Your monkey chatter is starting to calm down. Great observation.
Very nice.
What else?
Another daring
What would be the irony of trying not to be stressed on the way to a stress? You know, like getting there in time and in traffic and
Yeah.
parking and not getting lost and, you know, I don't know. It's a,
Hello, me too, right, on the way here. Is everything going to work out okay? Is the room going to be set up? Are people going to like it? All these things, right? What's your name?
Elise.
Elise. Thank you, Elise. Great, good observation. Anything else? Maybe even something more mundane or just...
Oh, sure.
I think we've met before,
Yes.
and of course my brain is like, okay, Dan and I have met before trying to place it, probably ICF, and there are way too many executive coaches in this world. Because I too am one, which is how we met, I'm sure.
Okay. So that's what you're thinking of. And what's your name?
Suzanne.
Suzanne. Okay, we'll figure it out before the end of the day.
Very nice.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, so that's just a brief example of being able to kind of turn our attention in and say, what's happening? What's happening internally?
So just to share a little interesting statistic for you, that only 37% of Americans feel they're doing either an excellent or very good job managing their stress. So what this is really saying, and this is through the APA, they do every year they do a Stress in America survey. Really what it's sharing though is that the majority of us are still having difficulty managing our stress. And there's a number of very good reasons for that, which we'll kind of share today in the short period of time that we have. Let's just begin with sources of stress. So there's two primary sources of stress. The first is external, and this is really what most of us are very familiar with, right? Just coming here, as you mentioned, right? The traffic, cars, maybe there was issues at work that made it difficult to get here, an illness. So all of these things, or the printer maybe was on the fritz. All of these things are external stressors that can affect us and interfere with our routine and make it have us feel more stressed. But something that's often less talked about are internal stressors. And these are really mental or cognitive processes that we all experience. And we usually do, and we have it multiple times a day. So these internal stressors over time can really kind of accumulate, and we start to feel increased stress and internal pressure because of them. So we're going to talk about two types of internal stressors. And Dan mentioned one of them, which was perfectionism. And another one, which I'm sure you've all heard about, another one is catastrophic thinking. So I'm going to talk a little briefly about catastrophic thinking. How many of you have heard of that? Just curious. Okay, so good, a good number of you. So many of us actually, we do a lot of catastrophic thinking, and what that really refers to is it's kind of extreme language or thoughts that we may have. So for example, we may say, I'm never going to get through this, right? This is never going to work out. This is terrible, this experience or this situation, or awful. So what do you think happens when we use that kind of extreme language, or we hear ourselves, either a thought or we hear ourselves saying it? What do you think might happen? I was curious, yeah.
defeat ourselves in events.
Okay, so it can make us feel, kind of undermine us or reduce our confidence, right? Who would agree with that? Okay, anything else that you could think? That was great, thank you. Anything else? Sure.
You might start acting on it.
Okay, you might start acting on it, right? Because of the reduced confidence, for sure. It may kind of make you act that way then, kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Another thing that really happens, it actually can trigger a physiological response, because we hear ourselves using the extreme language and it can make us feel more anxious and stressed. So it triggers the sympathetic nervous system, and it actually increases our arousal, like the fight or flight. So we could actually become more stressed and anxious. So we really would like to avoid using that and trying to change that over time, to shift to, instead of extreme language, something a little bit more moderate or even neutral, if we're able to do that. For example, instead of saying this is awful or this is terrible, what else could you say that's a little bit more moderate and neutral? Other? Oh, you go ahead, Suzanne.
This is not fun.
This is not fun, right? This is not fun, or right, this is not what I expected, things like that. So this is really a habit and a practice to get into, but But little by little, as Dan mentioned, as you begin to observe yourself doing it, you can shift from that extreme language to something more moderate and neutral, and that'll help actually reduce your physiology, and you'll feel less stressed from that. Another one is perfectionism. So how many of us feel like we have a little bit of perfectionistic tendencies? Wow, a full house, okay. Yeah, I had it too and still have them, yes, exactly. A hallmark of perfectionism is really kind of all or nothing thinking, right? So it's feeling like we have to give or do 100% of the time. And if we make a mistake, then it's a failure. Either it's a failure, the report, whatever project we're working on, or we're a failure. So it's often even more personalized. So that perfectionism and the thinking that goes with it can really undermine our confidence, really put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And these internal processes can really contribute over time, especially if it happens multiple times throughout the day and over the week. You can see the level of pressure it creates for us. It's also characterized by language such as, I have to do this, right? I should do that. I must do this, and if I don't, then we may think of kind of a worst case scenario, right? But what's very positive about this is that we have greater control over our internal sources of stress than external sources, right? We can't control the traffic, and if somebody in our family gets ill, but we do have control over the internal sources. And one of the other things I wanted to share with you about perfectionism, which a lot of people don't realize, is there's a strong relationship between perfectionism and procrastination. So many times, right, because of our perfectionism, we're so afraid we're not going to do it right, or we don't know how to do it, or it's going to take so much longer, so we procrastinate. And then that procrastination often contributes to increased stress for us, right? So the positive news is this.
Just a summary on this piece. So your first touchstone here, the first thing to take out of this is observation is something we have right in our immediate experience. And if we can more specifically start to observe the internal processes, we have greater choice and greater influence over the outcome. And I'm sure Dana won't mind me picking up on one of the things that she said with this thinking. Some of you might be saying, but sometimes things are just awful. Shouldn't we just say it's awful? And I always careful to say that, if you can get yourself to change the language and focus less on whether you're right or not about it, it will have a positive impact on the nervous system. It doesn't take the truth out of the matter that it's difficult or it's problematic, but changing that language, the brain responds to it. So that's important.